Good morning, everyone. We are here today to talk about a really important topic. We're here to talk about advert writing. If you subscribe to my blog, you'll know that I wrote about this in this week's blog, the blog that went out on Sunday, last Sunday. If you don't, I'm going to pop a link to my blog into the chat so you can have a look at that and you can have a read of it. There is more tips in there that I'm going to cover today because obviously in the time frame we've got, we can't cover everything. So there's a little bit more information in the blog if you want to pop across and subscribe. You'll get regular, obviously, tips and hints around hiring as well, but also you'll be able to read a bit more information on my tips on hiring success. Interview success. No, start again. Advert writing success. I talk about all these things, so I get confused sometimes with how many things are going on. Right. So today we're going to be covering six of the tips. Six top tips, or it's difficult because there's so many things that are important in advert writing, but I've picked six of the really key things that I think I need to cover today, and I want to get into those in a little bit more detail. As I said, I've popped a link to the blog onto the comments section, so you should be able to just jump on there and move across and subscribe to the blog, and you can then see last week's blog, which was all about advert writing. And so the first question I want to cover off is, why is it so important to craft a high quality job advert? Now that might seem really obvious, and actually, to be fair, it probably is obvious, but I think what often happens in the busyness of working in recruitment or working in hiring, in the busyness of our days, what we often forget is how important the high quality advert actually is, and what a massive difference it does actually make to the entire recruitment process, not just to the advertising part, to the entire recruitment process. And so I think what happens is, we need to write an advert, or, perhaps a hiring manager gives us an outline of what they want and we craft an advert, but we do it in a hurry. We don't always spend a lot of time on it. Maybe if it's a really hard to fill role, we spend a little bit more time on it, but often what happens, and we're all guilty of this, I'm guilty of this, we're all guilty of this. What happens is we're busy, we just want to get an advert out there, when we put something out that's quick. And the reason it's so important to spend time crafting a high quality job advert is because not only does it help us to attract the best people and the best, I'm going to call it talent, just for, it's a nice universal title, the best people to our organizations, but it's also going to help us streamline the hiring process. And it's going to do that in a few different ways, actually. It will help us build a really strong employer brand. Because, remember, if you go back to some of my earlier sessions where we look at the candidate journey, candidates are looking at us from the awareness stage, and that's part of the employer brand and building that employer brand. But sometimes your job advert is actually the start of that. Sometimes your job advert is the start of the awareness. So it's the first thing they see, because often it's the first piece of advertising that a prospective candidate will see about our organization. So it's really important to get that employer brand clear and across in the way that you want it to come across, in the right tone, in the right voice, with the right story and messages in that job advert. And also it helps you to foster a diverse and inclusive workforce. And again, if you can get out really inclusive language and really inclusive messages, and messages to demonstrate that you're welcoming diversity and you want diversity in the organization, you can do all of that in your job advert. So, all the work that people do on their employer brand and their messages, sometimes they do some brilliant work on this, and then it all falls down at the job advert stage because we don't bring that across to our adverts. We don't bring that into our advert writing, and so it gets a little bit lost. So like I say, I'm going to cover 6 tips today. There are 10 tips over in the blog if you want to head over and pick that up and read that. But the first tip we're going to be focusing on today is being clear on your ideal candidate profile. So your ideal candidate profile. So again, anybody that follows me or has come to my sessions before or has read any of my content or my blogs, you'll know that I talk all the time about ideal candidate profile. Everything you do in recruiting, in hiring for your organization starts from your ideal candidate profile. It doesn't start from your employer brand. Employer brand is very important, and it sits probably alongside its ideal candidate profile. But actually, you know, I'd probably even say your ideal candidate profile comes before your employer brand, because if you don't know the type of people that you're trying to welcome into the organization, how can you know the culture and the values and the brand that you want those people to create? Because actually, you know, in a way, your team and the people in the organization create the culture and they create the values. Yes, of course, the leadership can have a vision for these things that they want to change. But again, that comes back to being aligned to your ideal candidate profile. If the leadership vision for the employer brand and for the culture of the organization is one thing, you know, so that's kind of over here. And then the ideal candidate profile that you're bringing in because they meet the skill requirements that you've got is over here, and they're not aligned. Those, you know, that will never work. That culture will never happen. That culture will never come into being. It will always be a vision and an idea, and, you know, there'll be a lot of you know, the culture and the values and everything will be disjointed, and people will feel that it doesn't, you know, it's not working, and there'll be a disconnect because those two things are not aligned to each other. So, you know, I want to focus on that because I you know, I always want to make sure that people understand how important building and developing that ideal candidate profile is. And so what is an ideal candidate profile? Now, I do have some resources that I'll be happy to share with everyone after. In fact, I'll send links out to everyone after with a link to the recording and also some resources as well. So the first resource is I have an ideal candidate profile infographic type document. And it's just quite helpful because it's quite visual and you can see the things that you need to consider to build an ideal candidate profile. But what is an ideal candidate profile? It's basically have you heard of an avatar or a persona? So it's a persona of somebody that you think is your ideal candidate. Now, your ideal candidate profile will be different for a number of different areas across the organization. So you might have 6 or 7 ideal candidate profiles for the 6 or 7 really key areas in your organization. So for example, you might have an ICP for IT. You might have a separate ICP for finance. You might have a separate ICP for HR, and then for operations, and et cetera, depending on your organization, will depend on how many ideal candidate profiles you have developed and what areas they're going to be in, because every organization is different. You know, for example, in the NHS, we have an ideal candidate profile for a nurse, for a qualified nurse. And again, that ideal profile will include different things depending on the organization. So, you know, an ideal candidate profile for IT, for example, would probably include things like their qualifications and the skills and the experience they're going to bring with them. But it would also include things like the type of person they are, so the type of personality they have. Obviously, this isn't set in stone. This is a guide. And what it does is it helps you to identify, you know, where these people spend their time. So IT people might spend their time on certain social media platforms and not others. They might read certain publications and not others. They might go to certain job boards and not others. And so your ideal candidate profile is building up a picture of what this person tends to typically do. It's not going to be 100%, of course, but tends to typically do, and how they typically act and how they typically behave and where they typically hang out, we'll say, so that you can then focus your advertising, you know, like your job adverts, and also all other content that you create for candidate engagement and candidate attraction. You can focus that onto the platforms and using the type of voice and the type of stories and the type of messages that your ideal candidate resonates with. And when you put out a piece of advertising or a piece of content that you want to attract your ideal candidate profile, it needs to be something that when your prospective candidate reads it, they're sitting there nodding and going, yes, this is me. Wow, this is the job. This is my job. This job could have been written for me. And I think, anybody that's been in hiring a while has heard candidates come to them and say, oh my God, this job was written for me. I read it and it was tick, tick, tick. This was my job. And that's a job that was written really well for that ideal candidate profile. Now, that may have been intentional or it may have been completely accidental, but you're going to get a lot more of those kind of comments if you're really focusing on that ideal candidate profile. So that's the first step. Like I say, I'll share a resource after to help you to formulate your ideal candidate profile. Don't do them all at once if you haven't got any. Start with one. Pick one of your hardest to fill areas of the organization and work with the hiring managers in that area to develop an ideal candidate profile that will suit, generically that area. If you've got a really hard to fill area, you can develop an ICP specifically for a job purpose, but obviously it starts getting more time consuming. So you wouldn't tend to do that for every job in an organization, except for those really hard to fill areas. But if you've got a really hard to fill area, it's a great place to start to really build up a picture of what it is you're looking for so you can attract those people. And then the second step, so step one was, tip one, I guess, was identifying your ideal candidate profile. Tip two is creating a compelling job headline. And I say job headline because my secret tip is that this does not need to be a job title. It might be a job title, but that's why I use the word headline, because it could be a headline or it could be a title. Now, obviously, you're not going to use a headline that's wildly different to your job, but it doesn't have to be the title that's on the job description. So, I'll give you an example. You see an awful lot of job adverts out there for let's say, I don't know, sales representative or customer service assistant. Now, if you've got sales representative as your job headline, you are bunched in with hundreds of other sales representatives. And how can you possibly expect your ideal candidate to find you? Because most of the time people go onto job boards and they search for keywords, and often they will put in things like sales rep jobs. So you do want that in there, but you want it to be a bit more engaging and a bit more creative. What you want is when sales rep comes up on a page of 20 other search results on a Google page or an Indeed page or whatever platform they're looking on, when 20 sales rep jobs come up on that page, you want your job to stand out. And so the way you can do that is to create a compelling job headline. That might be something like sales representative focusing on this particular medical device. So basically it might be in more detail. You need to think about what is compelling as a job headline for your particular job and for your particular organization. It might be just expanding on the job title, but keeping the job title in there. It might be a different way of describing the job title that is not as definitive as the job title, but effectively says the same thing. It might be it might be an expansion, or it might be a development of what the role is about, or it might be a short description of the job that is effectively the job title, but not the job title, if that makes sense. And like I say, there's a couple of reasons for doing that. One, it's so you stand out in search results, because what you don't want to do is blend in. But two, you want it to speak to that ideal candidate. So you want them to look at that and go, oh yes, this sounds really interesting. This is really engaging. I'm really keen to read more about this. You need them to look at that headline. Your headline is your hook. Your headline is the first thing they see, and the headline needs to be something that draws them in and makes them think, I want to read a bit further. If your headline is the same as every other on the page and it just says sales representative, what's there to engage them, what's there to draw them in, and what's there to make them think, I'm going to click the button and I'm going to read a bit further. Your Yeah, there's one other thing I did want to say on this particular point, actually, I almost forgot, and it's a really important one before I move on. Can I just say, and I really, really want this to sink in, if you take nothing else away from this session today, I want this to be your really key takeaway. A job description is not an advert. Yes, a job description is not an advert. And you might think this is really, really obvious. Why are you telling us something so obvious? I'll tell you why. It's because I see so often the top section of a job description and then some of the key points copied and pasted into an advert template and then just posted. And, you know, and it's not engaging. A job advert is written to be a key list of tasks to give a candidate a clear steer as to what their job is and the key responsibilities and what it is the expectations of that job. It's not written to be engaging. It's not written to be exciting and to draw people in. Advertising is an entirely separate thing from a description. A job description is a piece of information to help that candidate understand what they're accountable for and what the expectations are of the work that they will deliver. A job advert or any advertising, and if you think of this in marketing terms, any kind of advertising is meant to hook people, excite them, engage them, attract them, and draw them in. So they're totally different purposes. They have a wildly different purpose in this world. A job description is extremely important, but it is not an advert. And actually, if you follow me on LinkedIn, which a lot of you I know do, I put out one of the LinkedIn polls a couple of days ago to pretty much ask about the quality of adverts that you see out there. And you know, I was expecting it not to look good. It actually looked worse. The poll looked worse than I even suspected, because the four poll answers were. So the question was, I'm going to read it for you. What do you think about the general quality, i.e. the content, the tone, the language, and the inclusiveness of job adverts that you see in your market? And the four answers were, the first one was some are great, some well-written ads. Second answer was okay, but average at best. Third answer was very standard, nothing unique. And the fourth answer was shocking, no wonder applications are low. I did think we would get more sitting in the average or standard than anything else. But I also thought we'd get more that were well-written ads, because I do think there are some people out there writing brilliant job adverts and really thinking about the content and what they're putting out there. But actually the results so far, and obviously the poll is still open for another week. So again, I can pop a link in the chat if you want to vote on it. And just by doing that, you'll also see the results once the poll closes. But right now, as I speak, some great well-written ads is only 12% of the votes. 12%, that's really low. That's a lot lower than I expected. Okay, but average at best is at 29%, which is quite expected. Very standard, nothing unique is at 35%. And, you know, if you think about this, 35% of job adverts that people, and this is just what people see, there's nothing unique about them. You know, how then does anybody expect them to attract an ideal candidate? How then do you expect that candidate to go, oh, this is interesting, this is exciting, I'm gonna look at this, I'm gonna click the button? And even more scary is that the answer that said shocking, no wonder applications are low, are actually sitting at 24%. And often that is because people are doing things like they're rushing and they're copying and pasting the job description, rather than using rather than writing a creative advert headline and then using the job description as a supporting document, which is the ideal scenario for how things should be used. So, okay, so on to the next tip. So my next tip, and this is a really, this is a really important one. I mean, and again, you know, this should be a no-brainer, but I see a lot of examples of, you know, some of the things that I'll mention here, and I'm just going to mention the things that we see on a regular basis that are absolutely not best practice and are not inclusive. and will push candidates away. So, first of all, making sure your advert uses inclusive language. There are some really good tools and some platforms that you can literally run your advert through these days to check for inclusive language. Inclusive language would be, could be as simple as using what's considered to be more feminine or more male, a more feminine or more male voice, and that is a thing. So some words and some language will attract female candidates, some language will attract male candidates more, and if you have one or the other, then of course your advert is less inclusive, because it effectively will mean that you'll get more of male or female potentially candidates. But there's so many other things that can be done to make your advert more inclusive. One of the things that I see quite a bit, and it is quite shocking that we're still seeing this these days, because this has been illegal for as long as I've been in the recruitment industry, because it's technically discrimination, but I still see it in adverts on a fairly regular basis, which is a bit scary. And that is using things like what I call, when I say biased terms or job requirements, it's things like asking for X number of years of experience. So, for example, if your advert says needs to have 5 years of sales experience to apply for the sales rep role, the reason that is discrimination, and the reason that you shouldn't be doing that, is that effectively eliminates candidates that are, we'll say, less experienced and often are younger. So it's the implication that you have to have a certain number of years of experience to be able to apply for this role, which eliminates people that perhaps have just come out of university or school or college or whatever it is, or they've perhaps been in the working environment for a couple of years, but they haven't built up 5 years of experience. And it effectively says we do not want young applications. That's not what you're intending to say. And I know a lot of people write these things not realizing the implications of that, but that is how that's what's implied when you write a years of experience on your advert. And people often ask me then, well, how can I then, get across my message that I need a certain amount of experience without using years? Because it is more challenging. Using years of experience is easy, and that's why people do it. Again, it's quick. My recommendation would be to talk about the skills or the experience that are required, as opposed to the years of. So, for example, you might say needs to have significant experience in cold calling and booking appointments to meet with new clients, and demonstrated experience of presenting sales propositions to a new organization. So, yes, it's not the same as years of experience, and yes, you might get some people, well, in fact, you will get some people that have got less experience. However, you might get a perfect person. Just because they haven't got 5 years doesn't mean they can't meet the requirements of the role or be brilliant at that role. And actually, you might be missing out on the best possible candidate just because you've stopped them from applying effectively because you've asked for years of experience. And the other thing with biased terms or biased job requirements is that, I think we've probably all heard this before, but there are certain demographics, particularly women are recognized for this, that will not apply for a vacancy unless they meet, almost 100%. And I think it's over 80% officially of the job criteria or the job requirements. If the job requirements are too heavy, so for example, if you've got 10 points on your job advert that the person needs, and 8 of those are essential requirements and 2 are desirable, some demographics will look at that and they'll say, well, I only meet 5 of those 8 essential criteria, so I'm not going to apply, even though they might have some of the desirables and they might actually be the perfect candidate for the job, but they just won't apply. And so you'll never even know about their application. You'll never even know about this potentially ideal candidate that you've just lost. So try to avoid overemphasizing essential requirements and make more of your requirements desirable. I would recommend no more than 3 to 5 essential criteria, and really challenge yourself on what the essential, or your hiring manager, on what the essential criteria are. You know, really challenge, really look at each of those essential criteria and think, well, actually, is this essential, or actually is it desirable? And if we had a candidate who had, you know, for example, let's say a degree. If you had if you think a degree education is essential for your job, you know, really think about it. Is it essential? Or actually, if you had somebody with, I don't know, perhaps A levels and a BTEC, or a higher diploma, would that person, you know, with the right experience mix, would that person be equally good to meet the requirements of the role? You know, just question those things. Every time question your essential criteria. And if you think, you know what, it's probably not essential, put it in as desirable. And, you know, make it very clear in your job description that the desirables are lovely to have, they're very nice to have, but please don't let them put you off applying for this vacancy if you don't have all of them, or even some of them. Okay, the next point I want to come to is considering your keywords and your search terms for SEO. And again, you know, this is something that is often forgotten about, because, you know, we're rushing, we're trying to write an advert, but we're not necessarily thinking about how people actually find our adverts. I think job adverts are often written on the assumption that people go straight to a job board and type in, you know, a title, and that's where how they find the job vacancy. Most candidates actually find job vacancies via a browser search. So I'm going to say a Google search because that's my browser of choice, but you can use whichever one you want. But most people will find job adverts through a Google search. So they'll put in keywords into a Google search, and that might be something, as I said earlier, as simple as job representative in medical devices, and they'll put that into a Google search, and then, you know, sales representative jobs in medical devices, let's say, they'll put that into a Google search, and then jobs will pop up for them. It'll usually take them to another, to a job board. You know, somewhere like Indeed is one that often gets, people get taken to quite a bit. I'm not necessarily here to sell Indeed at all, but Indeed do quite a good job of getting they scrape adverts from other people's job boards, and they make sure that they've got quite a lot of contents. Often, if you do a Google search, your candidate will be taken across to them because it's often the top job that comes up in the search results. And so when you think about the fact that candidates will use a browser search to find jobs that they're interested in, that means that you need to really think about those keywords that they would use and those search terms that they would use to pop into the browser to make sure that your job advert is coming up. And again, you know, this comes back to why you're thinking about the headline for your vacancy. So again, the headline is you know, it's the first piece of information that Google will scrape or Google will look at. It's called the H1 headline. It's the first thing that Google will look at to see if your headline matches the keywords that person has put into the browser. And so you want to try as much as possible to keep your headline using, you know, very keyword rich or search term rich, and think about the things that your ideal candidate would pop into Google. And again, this comes back to why you need to be clear on that ideal candidate profile, because if you're clear on that ideal candidate profile, you'll know their language, you'll know the way they speak and the type of things that are important to them and the keywords that are important to them. You'll have created those, and you'll be able to then use those as the keywords and the search terms for SEO for your role, to make sure that when they pop the details into a browser, you know, whatever it is you think they might search for, that your jobs are the ones that actually come up. And on to the, I think this is tip number 5. Adding a really clear call to action. So again, this might seem really obvious, and on job boards, you know, that is often just a simple apply now or apply here. But make it really easy for people to apply. Don't make it any more difficult than they need to. You know, there are ATS systems out there that, and I'm not going to name names, but there are ATS systems out there that a candidate will click apply on a job board. They'll come into your ATS system. Pardon me. They'll come into your ATS, and they'll be asked to fill out application. They'll be asked to upload their CV, and then they'll be asked to upload application details, and effectively they'll be duplicating their CV in that online application. And they take quite a lot of time to complete, and if somebody's rushing or they're busy or they're in a high pressure job and they're considering leaving, it's so easy to lose those candidates. Let's not make it any more difficult for people to apply for our jobs than we need to. So by asking somebody to send you a CV or to upload a CV and duplicate all of that information in an application, the candidate, is often going to think, or, particularly it's often the really strong candidates that are busy and in demand and under pressure. They're often the ones that don't have time for this. And, I get people saying to me, but, we want to know that the candidate's committed, and, them filling out an application shows that they're really interested and they're really committed. And that is true to a certain extent. But actually what tends to happen in a really challenging candidate market where not a lot of candidates are moving or leaving their organization, what tends to happen is the good ones are really busy and they have jobs and they don't have time to fill out hefty job applications, and so they often drop off and they don't complete your application. And again, you often don't even know about them because they won't ever submit it. So let's make it easy for people to apply. Let's not make it any more difficult than is necessary. And my other recommendation on your call to action would be to have a call to action where there's somewhere for people to contact somebody to have a chat with, or to ask questions or to discuss before they complete an application. Because again, I think, and this might not work for every role, because in high volume hiring areas, so for example, I'm thinking an area like customer service where often you get a very high volume of applications, you might not be able to do that. You might not be able to give them a telephone number or contact details to call and have a conversation with somebody, because the volume might be too high to deal with. And that's fine. This won't work on every occasion. But if it's a hard to fill role and you typically don't get a lot of applications or any applications, then there's no problem with adding an additional call to action. So you add a second call to action saying, if you've got any questions, or if you'd like to discuss the role in more detail or ask any questions before you submit an application, please call us, or please contact this email address to schedule a time, or here's a link to our Calendly, book a time, 15-minute conversation so we can have a chat with you first. Because you get an opportunity to really connect with the candidate, then draw them in, rather than put them off and think, oh, I'm not sure about this vacancy, I'm just going to move on to the next one that actually, I'm a bit more sure of, and I'm not going to bother applying to this one because I've got to submit my CV and then fill out an application. It's going to take me an hour to do that, and I'm not sure about the vacancy in the first place. It might be okay, but I've got questions, I'm just not going to bother. And I'll move on to the next vacancy. Instead, they go, okay, well, I might just put in a 10-minute telephone call, because actually a 10-minute telephone call to answer the questions I've got, is not a huge amount of my time. And it gives them the opportunity to connect with the organization, and for you as a recruiter or a hiring manager to connect with them and to really start to build a relationship and start to, nurture them and find out what's important to them. So give, if you can, and if it's appropriate for the vacancy, create more than one call to action. You've got your job board apply now link, of course, but create something that's a little bit interesting and a bit more inclusive and a bit more of an opportunity to to give that person an opportunity to feel welcomed and feel that they can call you and they can come in to get more information. Trust me, this step in itself will make a difference to the applications you receive, both good and bad, because you'll get candidates who will call you or who will email and ask some questions who actually are not going to be right for the role. And actually, by answering their questions, you stop them from applying, which saves you time, because you're not having to sift through and screen and telephone call and telephone screen candidates that they already know they're not appropriate, but perhaps an answer to their question wasn't in the vacancy. And then the very last step that I want to talk about today, so this is step number 6, is to monitor, track and optimize your advert's performance. So, you put your advert out there, and typically what happens is we put an ad out there and we just let it run. We hope for the best, but we're all busy, and we tend to forget about it, and we wait to see what applications come through, but we don't monitor it effectively. We're not tracking to see how many open rates it's got, how many people have clicked on the link, how many people have read it, how many people have clicked on the apply now button and perhaps have not applied. Looking at all those metrics, all of those metrics will help you to then go back, review your adverts again, and perhaps make tweaks and to optimize the advert's performance. So for example, if you're finding that your advert is getting a lot of hits, as in your headline's really good, it's drawing people in, and they click they click the button to read more about the advert, and then you lose them because they don't apply, then that suggests that perhaps your headline is good, but the first couple of paragraphs in your advert are not engaging, or you're going after the wrong people. Your ideal candidate profile is not being, the person you're engaging with your headline is not your ideal candidate profile, because when they then come into the body of the advert, it's not connecting with them and they're not engaging with it, and you're losing them. Or it could be that they are your ideal candidates because your headline is good, but you're not, the content of the advert is not engaging them, it's not connecting with them, and you're losing them. So don't wait until your advert closes to look at your results. Particularly in a hard to fill area, I would go in and monitor those results, or monitor the adverts, the activity of the adverts every couple of days. If you've got an advert for a really hard to fill area, you're not expecting lots of applications. If you're going in every couple of days to quickly check the click rates and the open rates and the application rates, it'll tell you, you'll get a picture very, very quickly of, because if you're not getting even any hit rates to looking at your advert in the first place, then clearly you're not advertising in the right places. If you're getting people engaging with the headline and clicking, but not then going any further, then there's something wrong with your advert content. If people are seeing in your advert in the job list a list of 20 other jobs, but they're not clicking on it, then it's because your headline is not engaging enough. So there's a few different things that you can look at to really optimize your advert's performance. And like I say, I would recommend that you look at those things, for those hard to find roles, probably every couple of days, and optimize. You might find that after a couple of days you've made some tweaks, and actually it's your advert is performing perfectly now, and you can leave it for the rest of the duration. Those first probably 2 to 5 days of your advert are the most important to make sure that the advert is actually doing what it is you want it to do, and it gives you the opportunity to optimize it and make those changes. And what I would recommend, if your advert isn't performing, go back to your ideal candidate profile and look at that in line with your headline, in line with where you're advertising, and in line with your content, because probably somewhere along those lines you've got it wrong. You might be advertising in the wrong place, or whatever it may be. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, I do have a couple of resources that I can share with you. I'm just going to head over to the comments to see if there's any chat comments at the moment. Okay, nothing in the chat at the moment. Does anybody have any questions on any of this? I'm just going to pop a link in the box. So I've created a advert writing tip sheet that you can also download. So it's got slightly different. The blog obviously is more of a conversational document talking about the benefits of advert writing and some of the tips that I've outlined today. And then the tip sheet is just more of a concise key list of tips and things to do to get your advert writing correct. Not correct, but more engaging, let's say, drawing the right people in. So pop links into the chat box so you can subscribe to my blog on LinkedIn and look at last week's blog on advert writing, and you can download that tip sheet as well. So any questions at all? Bear with me 1 second. I'm just gonna check if there's any questions in the feed. Come, bear with me, it's just coming up. Right. Doesn't look like we've got any questions at the moment. Okay, any questions at all? Has anybody got anything they want to ask, or hopefully that all makes sense. Yeah, before I log off and wrap up for the morning. Can't see anything at the moment. I'll give it another 30 seconds for anyone to pop any questions into the box. No. Okay. So hopefully that all made sense. Like I say, lots of resources for you to access, read the blog, download the tip sheet, and you know, if you have any questions after, if you pop them into the feed of this, they will still come through, and I'll still be able to see them, and I can come back and answer those for you at a later stage. But for now, thank you very much for joining me. It's been, yeah, as always, really enjoy doing these sessions, and I hope it's been valuable. I hope it's been useful for you, and I hope you've taken away some tips, and I look forward to seeing some of your adverts out there, and really, you know, hope you get some more engagement. Let me know how you get on if you try some of these techniques and try to you know, write your adverts in a slightly different way and you get some really good success. I'd love to hear about it. Best of luck, everyone, and I will see you next month for our next live session. Thanks, everyone.